Hello, and I am here with you in session 5 to talk about your lesson plan for session 5. In this case, we're going to be looking at math. And so if you see, we come down to our fieldwork activities. You'll see that you'll do your second reflection. And we're focusing on math/science. You're going to be looking at those topics and getting more information on those two content areas. I'm going to fast forward down to the draft math lesson plan. In this assignment, you're going to design a math lesson plan that follows the format provided in session 3. Just like you did in the previous session, you use this lesson plan template. Okay, so you're going to fill out that top information. Some of these things, like what we were saying, is just not real information, so I'm not really looking at that part. I'm focusing on the objectives, key vocabulary that you will be teaching, materials needed for the lesson, your lesson procedures, how are you going to introduce the topic to students, and then after your introduction, what are you going to do for your guided practice, your independent practice, and then coming over to lesson closure. How are you going to close the lesson? What types of follow-up activities would you do to build on that skill that you just taught? And then method of assessment/evaluation. So I'm not going to prolong this video because in session 4, I did a 2-part video on how to do the lesson plan. You're going to essentially do the same thing. It's just that you're going to be pulling from math standards. So we have mathematics pre-kindergarten. It was done in 2015. To my knowledge, it has not been updated, so we're going to still use these standards. It looks different from reading because the math people did theirs a little bit differently. However, you are going to pick an area to focus on. So the areas include domains. So we have the domain of counting and cardinality. The next domain is operations and algebraic thinking. Then we have measurement and data. So you're going to choose the domain that you would like to focus on. And then geometry. Okay, and that ends that. So choose one domain area. Now, if you choose counting and cardinality, then are you going to pick from this standard? So the overall essential knowledge is students will know number names and the count sequence. So they'll be able to count from 0 or count from 1 to 10 or what have you. So that's a broad area that we call that the cluster. You're going to pull specifically from the standard. Okay, so when we go here, when it has objectives, your objectives will be here. So you're going to pick and choose one of these bullet points. Okay, so the student will be able to use rote counting. The student will begin rote counting. The student will build on rote counting. So you're just going to pick one. Now people wonder, why do we only pick one objective? Because if your lesson has more than one, then you're going to have to assess for each one. So say, for example, if you choose this ability to use rote counting to name number words in order, and then you say begin rote counting, you're going to have to assess both this one. Can they use rote counting to name number words in order? For example, can they use a number chart to name each number on that chart in order? And then the second one you will have to assess is, can they rote count? So when you remove that number chart, are they still able to begin rote counting by ones up to 5? So in your assessment section, you're going to have something that assesses this objective and something that assesses this objective. So that's why I request that you choose one objective, because the more objectives that you put in the lesson, the more you will have to assess. Okay, so that is the whole purpose of that. And once you've identified your objective, what key vocabulary will the students need to know for math? And so the key vocabulary could be the actual number words. Maybe if you're doing something in geometry, the key vocabulary would have to be the shapes. So you're going to choose the key vocabulary. It could be 2 words, 3 words. It does not have to be a lot of vocabulary because the children are learning concepts. So what language are you going to teach them that will help them learn that concept? Okay, so that's that piece right there. And then materials needed. In order to get the children counting, are you going to use a number chart, a number line? Are you going to use the counting bears? Okay, so you're going to now parse out your lesson given whatever objective that you pick. Okay, so you're going to post your draft math lesson plan here. It's a draft. I'm going to provide you feedback just like I will provide you feedback on your reading. So if I haven't provided it yet, it's coming. And then you're going to do math modifications. So here, what additional modifications may be necessary to make the math lesson meaningful and accessible to a child with disabilities? Based on the student that you work with, and it does not have to be the same student, because I know in clinic you may work with student A the first Saturday, and then the next Saturday they'll give you student B. So as the students are fluctuating, think about that student that you work with for that time. So if the student has a visual impairment, how are you going to get that student to be able to count? If you're going to use a numbers chart, they can't see it. Are you going to enlarge the numbers? Or maybe are you going to let them touch a raised dot and they can feel it? 1, 2, 3. Are you going to use fingers? So these are things that I want you to think about. How would you modify your lesson for a child with a disability? And then based on the student that you work with, what types of modifications might be necessary in order for that child to access the content? Okay, so this post is a part of your lesson plan grade. Each lesson plan is worth 25 points, 20 points for the design of the lesson, and 5 points for modifications. So as you're discussing your student, you're telling me what is their goals that they're working on in clinic, what is their actual disability, and given that information, if they were actually in your math class, in a real class, how would you help that student access that lesson? What types of accommodations/modifications would be necessary? Okay, so that ends my talk on this week's lesson plan assignment. Okay, happy learning.